Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Caring in Crisis, the Tuesday Briefs, a part of the Trauma Informed Faith Communities Project. I'm Reverend Mary Hughes with Crisis Care Ministries, and once again, we are so glad to see you all here today. A few reminders, as always, before we introduce our wonderful speakers today. We want to let you know and remind you that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll formally close the webinar right at the top of the hour. And some of us stay a little bit afterwards for some more informal discussion, and you're welcome to do that as well. As you can see in the introductory slide rotations, find all things webinar, details about our schedule and presenters, their wonderful bios, and resources our presenters have provided at crisiscareministries.net. Just click on the webinar hub at the top of the page. We always want to say a very special word of thanks to our funders and those who are providing resources and training for our various webinars and for all of the Trauma Informed Faith Communities Project. We really are so grateful for their support and for their guidance. Throughout the webinar today, please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box, and we will monitor those and look at those as well toward the end of our hour. Kyla Powers, my assistant, would you say a word about attendance certificates for us?
Sure, yeah. So essentially to receive a certificate of completion for this session, you'll need to fill out a request form, which I will send to you in an email at some point today. And you should receive, once you fill out the request form, you should receive the certificate within the coming week, just to give everyone time to fill that out. So when you get the email, go ahead and fill out and submit the form. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me, and I'll put my information in the chat.
Thank you, Kyla. It is now my great honor to introduce to you Brian Candelaria with Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and Krista Figgins with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. As one who's worked in disaster response for decades, I don't know what we did before we had OILS, Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, and LASO, Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. I don't know what we did in Oklahoma. They are truly heroic. I'm such a fan, and I'm so pleased to be able to introduce these two to you. So I'll let them tell you a little bit more about the work that they do as Krista is working on the slide presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mary, for inviting myself and Krista to speak. We've done variations of this presentation that we're going to be doing for you over the past few years, and it's our pleasure to present it to you today. Just a little bit about myself. I got a bachelor's degree in multidisciplinary studies from OU. And then I worked as a legal assistant for 9 years, particularly in dealing in workers' comp. And then I went back to school towards the end of working as a legal assistant to get my master's degree in Indigenous Peoples Law from OU, and then I went to law school and was fortunate enough to graduate from Oklahoma City University School of Law. So during that time, I continued. I knew what I was going to do, and that is work in Indian law. So I'm very active in Indian law. While I am not an enrolled tribal citizen, I, as an ally, understand that the value, especially in Oklahoma, of doing what we can to represent and assist the citizens of the 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, as well in all 77 counties of the state. And so that's kind of what we do with OILS. Oklahoma Indian Legal Services is one of their missions. One of our missions is our main mission is to help enrolled low-income enrolled tribal citizens with their legal needs, their civil legal needs. And we, on a limited basis, assist in criminal cases dealing with the tribal courts. Many of our 39 federally recognized tribes have their own tribal courts, and so we participate sometimes as guardians ad litem, helping with the children in certain situations, and then we help as defendant attorneys in limited tribal court situations. So that's a little bit what OILS does. We protect sovereignty of the tribal nations, and one of the issues over the years that has become increasingly more important, as everyone on this meeting well know, is the fact that with disasters comes the need for legal services, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Because when you think about disasters, you don't necessarily think about legal situations, and given recent jurisdictional issues, it's important to kind of have a background and understand tribal and federal Indian law. So that's a little bit about myself. Don't want, we can talk more as we go, but I'll go ahead. Krista, we're
all right. Well, thank you everyone for bearing with me as I'm working through my technical issues this morning. I apologize. My name is Krista Figgins. I am an attorney licensed in Florida, and I work with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. I work in the disaster response unit, and what we do is free civil legal services for very, very low-income people who have been impacted by disaster. And I started with LASSO, I believe it was actually 10 years ago, last week, I think. Moved here in 2012 from Florida. And about 5 months after I got here, there was an EF5 tornado in Moore, Oklahoma. And my office was asked to attend a community organizational meeting in Moore, and I went because I was the person who had nothing on their calendar for that block of time that day. And I went down, and 6 weeks later, I ended up becoming chair of the long-term recovery group for Moore. And I did that for the next 2.5 years. And since then have been very, very, very involved in disaster recovery, and got a really crash course in disaster recovery in 2013. And one of the first days that I was at one of the, what I found out later was an Oklahoma VOAD meeting in Moore. I sat next to a very nice woman named Mary. And that's, of course, our friend Mary Hughes. And that's how we met. And how we started working together, doing a lot of the things that we do now. But I did go to Florida State and for college and for law school, and again have been here since 2012. So I'm loving my time in Oklahoma. Love the big sky. Don't have that so much in Florida. Hemmed in by a lot of tall pine trees most of the time, especially in the central part of the state. So love the big skies and the sunsets out here, that's for sure. So I'm sure everyone has still has had time to read my first slide, but I'll go ahead and talk about it anyway. Really, what we're talking about today is disaster impact, the legal implications of disaster impact, and the nature really of disaster response in Oklahoma, and also talk about how faith communities are absolutely integral to disaster response in our state. All of the good things that happen in recovery in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is, in my opinion, the national leader in recovery and in response. Those things happen because of our faith communities and because of our faith leaders, and would not happen otherwise. So, all right, our presenters, of course, today are Brian and myself. And the first thing we'll talk about is what is disaster. The World Health Organization has defined a disaster as an occurrence disrupting the normal conditions of existence and causing a level of suffering that exceeds the capacity of adjustment of the affected community. Disasters can be natural meteorological events like tornadoes, floods, wildfires, hurricanes, etc. Disasters can also be man-made, such as terrorist events like the Murrah building bombing, chemical spills, and nuclear accidents, and can also occur with the outbreak of disease, such as COVID-19 with our public health emergencies in 2020 and beyond. And the Stafford Act, which is the act that really authorizes FEMA to exist and gives FEMA jurisdiction, talks about two definitions for disaster. Can be any natural catastrophe, wind-driven water, tidal wave, tsunami, etc., which in the determination of the president causes damage of a sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant major disaster assistance under the Stafford Act to supplement the efforts and available resources of states. And in Oklahoma and everywhere else, we have different types of disaster declarations. You'll hear sometimes that a disaster has been declared. Those are presidentially declared disasters, again, authorized via the Stafford Act. Those can be requested by the state. They can also, due to recent amendments to the Stafford Act, be directly requested by a tribal nation. Brian, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and tribal nations can, since the Sandy Improvement Act of 2013, they, under the Stafford Act, tribal nations can apply directly to the president for emergency aid and for an emergency declaration. Can you go to the next slide, Krista?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the amendments to the Stafford Act were developed in order for the tribes to practice sovereignty as far as how disaster affects their particular tribal nation. And so that they don't have to, in the past, pre-amendment, they would have to go directly to, the governor of the state in which the tribal nation was located and request aid through them. Here, they can do it on their own. A good example, over the past few years, the Muskogee Nation has exercised this ability and has applied for disaster relief or disaster declaration for their tribal citizens. So they are in the same status as states, and they are removing any of the legal barriers, and it attests to the stronger relationship with the federal government, and so it helps them practice, as far as their sovereignty. So next slide. So this is particularly important because all of the tribal land that's affected, many of the tribal tribal nations, especially here in Oklahoma, have emergency management, and so emergency management agencies, and so What's also important to note is that some of the tribes, their land goes over more than one state. And so a good example is like the Navajo Nation. So that allows all members of that tribal nation, no matter what state they are in, to recognize that they are affected by disaster. So they don't have to therefore request from multiple governors for aid. So it's important to note that the breadth and scope of the application of the Stafford Amendment can be affected by agency policy as well as federal case law. And where that comes into play as the slide notes is McGirt. An example is the Supreme Court opinion with McGirt, which is case law. And so that deals specifically with how we view reservations, Indian land status of the 5 tribes, especially here in Oklahoma. McGirt is in, next slide. Oh, so real quick, as far as real quick on McGirt is why that McGirt's important is because it dealt with jurisdictional issues, and so that's important, especially as we discuss the phases of disaster.
Thank you, Brian. And as you can see from this slide, there are phases to disaster. They are recurring events and are really typically thought of in the emergency management and response community as occurring in the cycle that you see: mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, early and long term. And every community in the world, including ours, is in one of these stages every day at all times. So the preparedness stage is going to include activities designed to get a community ready for events that cannot be prevented or mitigated prior to their occurrence. Those are going to be like planning events, training events, and preparedness exercises. The goal is really to make sure that everyone is prepared before the emergency happens. And it really empowers response and takes place at many levels. I was recently able to have a friend from home, from Florida, visit me here in Oklahoma City, and I took her to the bombing memorial downtown. And one of the displays that really resonated with me is that apparently about a month before the bombing, a lot of the agencies that ended up responding to the bombing had actually participated in a joint exercise about how to respond to a disaster event. And because that exercise had occurred so recently, they really felt that the response that they were able to put forth to the bombing, was much better, because everyone who was responding really already knew one another. They trusted one another. They were able to work together, really seamlessly, because they had already had that familiarity with one another from that exercise. So it really does make a difference to have all the preparedness work done. Then, of course, the disaster strikes and you have the response phase. That's the rescue or the emergency phase. And that's, generally it's a very dangerous environment. And it really includes the actions that are going to protect lives and property during the disaster. This is where you're going to see the first responders. And that's going to be local fire, police, search and rescue, emergency medical, feeding and sheltering. Then you have the recovery phase. And this is going to be how the community builds back after disaster, the repairing, the rebuilding, and the restoring the community to its pre-emergency condition as best as you can. And the recovery phase is really going to be divided into 2 kind of phases: early recovery and long-term recovery. The early recovery is going to be when you see the chainsaw crews out, when the kind of basic, Maslow hierarchy of needs, food, clothing, shelter, things are happening. And then long-term is really going to be resuming the routines of daily life, restoration of infrastructure, vital life support systems, And this is when the clients who have legal needs generally really come to the fore. So, do we have many disasters in Oklahoma? Yes, we do. In the 10-year period that you see, or I guess I hope you can see, represented in this chart, Oklahoma was impacted by 38 disaster events, including the pandemic. And all of the ones that you see in yellow were severe enough and had a severe enough impact on municipalities or individuals to receive a federal disaster declaration. So this is a chart that Mary has been maintaining for many years. This is not her chart. It's the one that I kind of took from her and have been adding to myself. But as you can see, we have a lot of disaster events. We've had a federally declared disaster every year for the past 3 years. And as of late June 2023, the average period of time between disaster events in Oklahoma was 99.5 days. So you're really looking at a disaster event every 3 months over the past 10 years. And that's defining a disaster as an event that requires response from outside the community in order to affect recovery. In Oklahoma, we have lots of different kinds of disasters. Yes, sir, Brian?
No, and I was just going to mention, we got in the chat, Keith said, do tribes have a threshold amount that they must reach for a disaster declaration and federal and state assistance? And just like the state, they do have, just as what Krista was showing, all of those, especially the ones in yellow that were ended up being federally recognized, whether or not they're white, as far as they weren't federally recognized declarations, federally declarations, so part of that is whether or not the damage meets those thresholds. And for example, we had the wind damage event which was the last one on Krista's list there, in Tulsa, and it for a variety of reasons may not have been able to reach that threshold, and it's what in some cases can be 138,000 to 140,000. Usually it's, if Krista, if you can correct me and stuff, usually it's about 250,000. And so for tribes with limited tax bases, that can be problematic, and even for the state as far as that goes. And so you may or may not reach those thresholds, and they may or may not go into the yellow as far as being federally recognized.
Thank you for monitoring the chat, Brian. I appreciate it. Okay, the types of disasters we typically have in Oklahoma, we have earthquakes, we have wind events, like the derecho that Brian is referring to that we had in June. We have had some horrible wildfires in the western part of the state. And then we have water. We have too much water, too little water, frozen water. Then we have had, sadly, mass casualty violence, such as the Murrah building bombing, and also the Stillwater, parade tragedy that we had a few years ago. And also, again, health crises like the recent pandemic. So we have a state that has a lot of disasters, and we also have a state, sadly, that has a great deal of poverty. And when a state that's very disaster prone that also has high poverty, when poverty and disaster come together, that's not good. So poverty in Oklahoma is very, very high. However, Louisiana is the #1 most poverty-stricken state in the country. The poverty rate there is 18.4%. Oklahoma, 15.1%, or 589,000 people live below the poverty rate. The poverty rate is listed there, as you can see, $25,760 or less for an individual, $34,840 for a family of 2, and $53,000 for a family of 4. That makes Oklahoma number 8 in the list of the top 10 most poverty-stricken states. And our poverty rate has been above the national average since 2008. The U.S. poverty rate in 2021 was 11.6%. So, interplay between poverty and disaster. We also need to talk about the rural nature of our state. Oklahoma is largely rural. We have 77 counties. 60 of those are considered to be rural in nature by the USDA and the Office of Management and Budget. And why does this matter? Poverty rates are higher in rural and small town Oklahoma than in the major metro areas. In the major metro areas, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Lawton, 13.1% poverty. In every other part of the state, the average is 16.8%. That's a big difference. And the poverty rates are also going to be much higher amongst children. Over 1 in 5 Oklahoma children live in a household that has an income below the poverty line. So the interplay between disaster and poverty here in our state really impacts low-income families, because low-income families are disproportionately impacted by natural disaster events. And why is that? Well, people who have more resources move away from disaster-prone areas. We saw that in the eastern part of the state with the 2019 floods that were federally declared. There were a lot of folks living along those river bottoms when those areas flooded in the 1980s, and the people who could afford to leave left. They moved to higher ground, and that left a large concentration of lower income people living on those floodplains. So they were, disproportionately impacted the next time it flooded. And low-income people are much more likely to live in lower quality housing that is going to suffer more damage in a disaster event, or homes that have had a lot of deferred maintenance because folks couldn't, afford to make repairs. They couldn't afford to fix their roof so that when, the tornado hit, it was stronger against that, or able to repel more water during, the flood event from the rain. We saw that again in 2019. We had trailer homes on the eastern part of the state that were submerged in water, 4 or 5 feet of water for a couple of weeks. Well, the way trailer homes are built is every part ties into every other part. So when you destabilize the entire structure because the entire floor falls out because it's been submerged in 4 or 5 feet of water for, 14 days, which is exactly what happened to a lot of people. Those entire homes just collapse because this, a major part of the structure has been removed. And trailer homes are very difficult to repair. It's very hard to fix them. You have to buy new ones, and people can't afford them. And it gets to become a really vicious cycle. And low income folks are going to have fewer resources at their disposal to help protect themselves against disaster impact or to assist them in their recovery. For example, years ago in Florida, we had hurricanes all the time, and sometimes you'd see folks that were unable to afford the plywood to board up their house, and knew that they were going to suffer significant damage because they were unable to really seal the wind envelope around their home. So and elderly people on fixed incomes are going to be disproportionately impacted by disaster, because especially in Oklahoma, we see a lot of elderly folks who live on fixed incomes who drop their homeowner's insurance as soon as they pay off their house. If they have that home, they get it paid off, they're no longer required by their mortgagor to carry that homeowner's insurance, and it becomes a choice between feeding themselves or being able to afford their prescriptions, they drop that homeowner's insurance. And that is not a figurative example. Every year since 2013, I've heard that story more than once from elderly folks who cut that expense as soon as they could. And again, you hear the phrase, it's expensive to be poor. When you are paying higher interest rates, can't prepay for premiums to get discounts, etc., it can cost more money to be able to do things. and low interest small business administration loans after disasters that are sometimes available may not be available to low income people. They may be found to have too small of an income to be able to repay the loan, or have an inadequate or poor credit history, which makes them unable to qualify, for the loan at all.
And to that point, Krista, real quick before going to how it affects the tribes also, is the importance as far as, one of the things SBA loans, you can do if you don't have much of a credit history and stuff, is put collateral up, and often that collateral is in the form of home or land, and that's why when we talk later about the importance of titles, that it's very important as far as demonstrating ownership of either land, or most importantly home, which we'll talk about shortly. As far as a lot of especially here in Oklahoma, a lot of the tribal nations are in rural areas. And Keith had asked about, as far as declarations, whether or not it's based on population of a tribe, and it is not. It's usually the property damage. Of course, the larger, area, larger population you have more people affected, and therefore more property damage to go up to that threshold, to meet threshold. But for the most part, a lot of the tribal nations are smaller, tend to be smaller, and in more rural populations. There's more poverty because, just as Krista mentioned, fewer resources available. You get what are called legal deserts as far as legal services. You have, by this time, everyone on this in this group can attest and can understand that you have healthcare issues as far as healthcare resources, as small community hospitals are leaving more and more of those areas. And so again, less available resources, and of course, on top of that, we have more disasters than the average state our size. And then even to add more is the jurisdictional complexities that we talked about earlier, as far as does a person who is living in rural southern Oklahoma, that maybe living near Lawton, if a tornado comes through, do they get their help as a tribal citizen? Do they get assistance through the state? Do they get assistance through their tribe, whether it's Kiowa, whether it's Caddo, whatever the tribe is? Do they get, who can they turn to? And that's one of the things that we can help with, as far as far as that goes, as far as Krista in her team, as well as Oils, is helping tribal citizens understand where they can turn to even get and help on that next stage as far as recovery. And that's a complexity of folks who are not tribal, who may not may not encounter. So
all right, so why are legal services critical to disaster survivors and to disaster recovery? After a disaster event, it is not necessarily intuitive for a survivor to think, my house just got hit by a tornado, I really better find a lawyer. Or for lawyers to think, I think those survivors need legal help, I should contact Lasso or Oils and offer to volunteer. So we wish they would, but it is very, very common for disaster survivors to need legal assistance in the wake of a disaster event. There are issues that survivors experience that the only solution is legal. The only way they can be helped is through the work of an attorney. And if they don't get that help, it can really frustrate their recovery or prevent them from recovering at all. We have two disaster legal services, two programs in Oklahoma for legal services. Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, where Brian is, and Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, where I work. And we are both statewide organizations. Both of our organizations serve every county in the state. All of our services are free and at no cost to low-income people. And we are extremely fortunate to have a very, very strong disaster response and recovery community. And we are, very, very, happy to be able to contribute to the work of that community and assisting folks. So Brian, tell us about OILS.
Okay, so OILS, as you folks can see on there, so we're funded through Legal Services Corporation, and we're a nonprofit. As I mentioned in my introduction, we serve low-income enrolled tribe members living in Oklahoma. So one of the when I say that, so not only do we serve the members of the 39 federally recognized tribes that are located here within the boundaries of Oklahoma, but several folks who are enrolled tribal citizens of other tribes outside that is outside their reservations, their Indian communities are outside Oklahoma, but live here in Oklahoma. We help them as well. A good example was mentioning Navajo. We've helped folks from the Chippewas. We've helped folks from all over, some Mescalero Apache tribe members from all over the country that live here in Oklahoma. And so we have an income-based threshold. You have to be low income, and our main office is located in Oklahoma City, and we have a satellite office in Ada that we work in collaboration in conjunction with East Central University. And so that's a clinic that we work with them and have students assist us in, and again we help in all 77 counties. So we are one of the few what are called standalone. We're not a division of like Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. We're not a division of, we're independent. So we deal with those civil cases again that affect and are based upon a person's unique tribal status, as a tribal citizen. And so we deal with not just on disasters and stuff, but we also deal with issues dealing with the Indian Child Welfare Act. We deal with issues dealing with wills. We do wills, we do probates, and so we help as much as we can, based on their status as tribal citizens. So the probate, we kind of specialize in probates dealing with restricted land. There are two basic Indian status land issues, as far as if you're a member of the 5 tribes, that's Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, Seminole, and Muskogee or Muskogee Creek. They have what's called restricted land, and other tribes like the Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, all of those are what are called trust lands. And so again, Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, we understand and we we specialize in dealing with these variety of issues, and this specialty that expertise as far as how we can help all tribal citizens, whether they're elderly, whether they're young. We deal with housing issues, tribal sovereignty issues. You can pretty much guarantee that starting in March and February and March, usually we start getting phone calls regarding whether or not high school seniors can wear regalia to their high school graduations, and so that is a sovereignty and also an individual rights issue that we can help with, and just provide some legal guidance if need be on that. So the next slide is a picture of the tribes here in Oklahoma. And as you can see, these are the federally recognized tribal jurisdictions. And as you can see in the insert there demonstrates, when we were talking earlier about population size of tribes, when we're talking about tax bases, when we're talking about area and land. A good example is that insert, which is in the northeast part of the state, just past Tulsa. And that's in the corner of where you've got Missouri and you've got Kansas and Arkansas, right bordering a lot of these tribal nations. But these are each distinct tribal nations, and like the Quapaw, they have their own tribal court system. And so if a storm comes up, like we had with the derecho, some of these folks were affected, and so some of these tribes were able to help their citizens as much as they could, and so it just demonstrates the unique part of Oklahoma in that these are all distinct tribal nations. So the next slide talks about we've got the Act of 1947. You've got issues, not just that, but you've got jurisdictional issues dealing with like the Major Crimes Act. You've got the Indian Reorganization Act. You've got the American Indian Probate, what's called the APRA, the American Indian Probate Reform Act. You've got various legislative laws that affect the citizens here in Oklahoma and throughout the nation. And again, as far as restricted property, you have to understand how restricted property is passed down. This is particularly important for, and timely for those that may or may not have seen the recent movie regarding Killers of the Flower Moon, where it discusses the Osage, which they themselves have very unique tribal land issues regarding mineral rights and head rights. And so with all of that comes federal bureaucracy, where you as folks, most of these folks on this call are not federally enrolled tribal citizens. So we can make documents like wills and not have to go through certain steps. If you have a full-blood enrolled tribal citizen of the 5 tribes, they could possibly have to have their will approved by a judge. And again, extra steps that were designed to, in quotation marks, protect tribal citizens. But in the end, what it does is if a person does not go through those steps, their land falls out of restriction and can therefore be purchased by anybody and is no longer protected. And so you create these barriers that we have expertise to help people with. And that's what that part on county courts of state vested with jurisdiction, that's what that's referring to as far as approval. So trial attorneys from U.S. Represent the interest of restricted Indians. Again, that's, you have to get that approval to make sure that the transfers, even in wills, are done properly, and that conflicts are resolved in favor of the guardian, which is the federal government. And so why that's going to be important in the future is you have treaty obligations, you have treaties, and in particular disaster situations, like let's say drought, you're going to have issues where the guardian, the United States as guardian, may have conflicts between the state and the tribes, and so it's can be complex, but oils can help with those issues. So how do we help with those issues? Well, we connect survivors to volunteer organizations and resources like Oklahoma VOAD. We also participate in a group called the Intertribal Emergency Management Coalition, or Item C. We communicate with clients in outreach events. We go out. Usually it's with LASSO as well. We go out and kind of get in the communities as much as possible. We communicate to clients through social media. We help review property issues for tribal members. We review and deal with title issues. And then we do a lot of educating, and then coordinating pro bono projects, again with LASSO. And then finally, we collaborate with state agencies and tribal governments, and most importantly, nonprofits like Oklahoma VOAD, where we meet partner organizations to help tribal citizens.
Thank you, Brian. And just speaking from the LASSO perspective, we are so grateful to have such a wonderful partnership with all of the incredible attorneys and staff at OILS. As you can hear from what Brian's talking about, the work that they do is extraordinarily complex, and there are so many layers to it. I liken it to being a patent lawyer, which is a job that's so awful they make you take another bar exam on top of the first bar exam that you have to take. So it's just extraordinarily specialized. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't need to be doing it. And I am so grateful every day to be able to have Brian and his colleagues as a resource, and for us to be able to refer clients who come to us who have these really complex issues, because you need an expert to really work with them. And that's what Brian and his colleagues is experts. So thank you, Brian. Grateful every day for you and everybody at OILS. So Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, I'm going to be super quick. Long story short, we serve all 77 counties. We have 18 offices throughout the state. We employ over 240 attorneys at this point. We have over 300 total staff. We are the largest law firm in the state. We do not tell the other law firms in the state that, but we are the largest law firm in the state at this point. And we serve 14 or 15,000 or close 14 or 15,000 cases a year, impacting probably just a little less than 30,000 people. So why are legal services critical to disaster? We talked about that it is very common for folks to have legal issues following a disaster. Brian has already talked a little bit about this, but I'll defer to him if he'd like to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think, again, talking about, the complexity of the different types of Indian status land, um, you know, uh, I think we've talked about that a little bit as far as, with that comes, whether or not, a lot of ownership issues, and as you can talk about a little bit more, when people are, especially in rural, they own a home, and it becomes generational as far as the ownership, and the titles don't necessarily catch up, don't and for tribal citizens, it's particularly an acute problem, given the various jurisdictional hoops that you have to go through. But it's whether it's in rural Louisiana, rural Oklahoma, a lot of times that that generational home ownership situation can exacerbate home ownership issues.
Absolutely. All right, so just to talk about real quickly a few of the most common legal issues that we see at LASSO, that Brian and his colleagues see at OILS after disaster. Replacing lost documents. Tornadoes, floods, wildfires, as we discussed, all very commonly occurring in Oklahoma, are very, very effective at destroying or relocating your documents. We have had a lady whose checkbooks were taken from her home by a tornado that impacted Sulphur, and somebody found them in their yard in Ada and started writing checks on that lady's account that afternoon. So we can help with replacing your driver's license, your social security card, EBT cards, immigration documents. Those are things that we can help survivors do quickly, because you need identification to be able to show that you live at a disaster impacted address. Because if FEMA, if a disaster is declared and FEMA is called in, or if it's not declared, or even if it is, and there are nonprofits in the state that have resources to help disaster survivors, you do not qualify for those resources if you do not live at a disaster impacted address. And the longer it takes you to prove that you live at a disaster impacted address, the longer the black mold is growing in your house. That's it. Takes as long as it takes, is as long as your house is sitting there with bad things happening. So we try to make sure we get documents replaced quickly. One tip I will say, if you have a phone that takes pictures, take pictures of your social security card, take pictures of your driver's license, store those in a password protected, cloud-based storage system of some kind, whatever makes you comfortable. But it's a lot easier to replace those things if you have copies of those things. And those copies will sometimes work with, again, the nonprofits that help disaster survivors to prove, address. Insurance issues are big ones. If you do not understand exactly what all of your insurance policies cover, then you are not alone. Most people do not. Most survivors know they have insurance, but they aren't really sure what benefits it might provide, as far as, rental assistance or, replacing property. Survivors often are going to disagree with the amount that the insurance companies are offering as a settlement. The insurance claim may be denied completely. The survivor may need help with an appeal to their insurance company. We are also always going to send folks who have insurance issues first to the Oklahoma Department of Insurance. The Oklahoma Department of Insurance are the ones that regulate whether or not an insurance company can actually sell insurance in this state and make money from Oklahomans. So insurance companies tend to be a lot more frightened of the Oklahoma Department of Insurance than they are of lawyers. But I can tell you that we had a client come in 2013 to our office in Norman who was owed $25,000 by their insurance company. And the insurance company agreed that they owed this client $25,000. But they had been telling her for 6 months that the check was in the mail, and they just would not send her money. So she came into our office. 2 days later, one of our attorneys sent a strongly worded letter to the insurance company, and they messengered that check over to our office within 2 days. So all it took was a letter, but it took a lawyer writing a letter for that lady, to be able to get her funds. Housing issues, survivors who own homes can face a lot of legal issues. As Brian mentioned, generational housing in Oklahoma, sometimes also called Granny's house. A lot of people in Oklahoma live in Granny's house. Maybe your grandma wasn't doing well health-wise, and you and your family moved in to help take care of her. She passes away. Your mom's the only functional heir, to the home. But they never get the probate done. And then maybe your parents pass away, and now you're really the only heir left to the property, but it's still in your grandmother's name, and the tax records are still in your grandmother's name. When that tornado hits your house and you go to apply for FEMA, you're not going to get anything because you do not own that house legally. So at that point, it takes a couple of months to do a probate. And again, that 8 weeks that probate's sitting there needing to be done, that's 8 weeks the black mold's growing in your house. So you really, really want to make sure that those title issues are dealt with. And that's something that Oils does a lot of work on, is trying to preemptively correct title problems. We have a lot of rent to own in Oklahoma. Contract for deed technically is what it's called. And those are generally going to be contracts that almost all of them say that the person who's renting to own the home is responsible for all repairs and is not eligible to receive any insurance proceeds from the house if there is homeowners insurance. And the problem that comes up there is that FEMA will not duplicate benefits. So if they see there's already been an insurance payout on an address and you come in and say you live at that address, you're not going to get anything from them, because they have seen that there's already been insurance that paid out for that address, but you have contractually waived your right to be able to access any of that funding. So contract for deed is not a good thing.
And Krista, can I real quick, another example of that, dealing with tribal nations, is a lot of the tribes are in an effort to encourage home ownership of their tribal citizens. They will purchase a house, and then the tribal member can contract to kind of rent to own, and that's through usually the tribe is able to do that through HUD programs or federal agency programs, and or grants. They purchase the home, the tribal citizen can, but in that time, if a disaster occurs, then you get those issues. In other words, it doesn't have to be just a private home ownership rent to own situation. It could be through a tribal agency, housing authority, and that's where we can kind of step in and take a look at the contract, review the contract, and provide some legal guidance for the client.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And consumer issues are a big issue after a disaster. There is a lot of fraudulent contractor activity in Oklahoma after a disaster. 2013, we saw a lot of contractors, I use the air quotes for that, come up from Texas, and it was folks who took a magnetic sign and put it on the side of their truck saying they were a contractor. And they would prey upon people. They would go around and, they'd find an elderly person, who had no family, and they would, be real nice to them and explain to them that if they just gave them 100% of their insurance check, they would move that person right to the front of the line in fixing their house. But, you've got to give me your insurance check up front. And a lot of these elderly folks did that. Because that was a nice young man that had been coming around to see them, and they trusted them. And then those folks took that money and left the state, and these elderly folks ended up with no insurance check and no house. We also see issues with moving services, with storage services, especially after the floods in 2019. There were a lot of issues with RV sales. People bought an RV, and the one that was delivered was not the one they thought they paid for. And it's real hard to move, one of those if you don't have the ability to do it once it's been delivered, and people just kind of ended up keeping them, and it just was not a great situation. So renters, there's a lot of folks who rent in Oklahoma, and when those rental units become disaster impacted, we have issues with landlords making repairs in a timely manner. We see rental units that are completely uninhabitable that landlords are still charging rent for. And, you know, we do a lot of advising regarding rights to terminate leases or rental agreements. We also will help with getting security deposits back. You know, I've seen a landlord try to say that, you know, the entire wall that was missing from a dwelling was something the tenant had done when it was clearly something the tornado had done. And we also see a lot of issues, again, insurance with renters insurance companies as well. Family law issues. The first thing we saw in 2013 that came into our office in Norman after the tornado was a family law issue. We had a parent come in because the other parent had primary residential custody of the child, and they had to move into a shelter because their home had been destroyed. And the other parent, who had had no contact with that child for years, came in and wanted custody because they did not want their child living in a shelter. Well, what that parent really didn't want to do was pay child support. And if they had residential custody of the child, they didn't have to pay child support anymore. So we saw that come in the first thing. We see a spike in domestic violence after disaster events that turn into family law issues. We see a lot of guardianships. Sadly, folks get hurt, folks lose their lives in disaster, and often we will have to do a guardianship for a child who is no longer has parents, or like a medical guardianship for an adult who's no longer able to make their own decisions because of an injury that they received. And also with regard to child support, we will help if you lost your job during a disaster and you can no longer make your child support payments until you find another job. We will help with modifications for that as well. And Brian, did you want to talk about oils?
Yeah, just real briefly. So as far as guardianships after a disaster, we seek to help on that. As far as uncontested or voluntary guardianships, where a minor Indian child is given to a custodian. Usually it's kinship, so that by the parent, in order for the child to be in a safe place. We get these a lot. A good example during the Shawnee tornado in the spring. Tornado came through. A lot of house damage was done. This was also in Seminole last year. A lot of home damage was occurred, and so you need to get the roof replaced. The kids couldn't live in their room until the roof was replaced. They still needed to go to school. The parents still wanted them, kind of in a safe place, and so they made arrangements for a guardian, and a lot of the tribes have in their tribal codes guardianship codes, and so you can go through the tribe, especially if they're in traditional tribal boundaries, to deal with those guardianship issues, and then voluntarily give the children back when the time is right. But as far as disasters, that is a coping mechanism. That is a way to help the family survive and recover together.
Thank you, Brian. And I know we are a little over our time. I know we're supposed to end at 11. It's about 7 after. I am going to go ahead and get through the rest of these slides real fast with Brian's permission, and also let everyone know if they have any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat, and I know Brian and Mary are going to monitor that. So employment issues, we see folks who never received their last paycheck a lot of the time if the business where they worked was destroyed. We also help people with unemployment benefits, applications, and appeals. We will assist people in applying for FEMA, Social Security. We can help folks who were denied, who are in disagreement with the amount of the award. And sometimes FEMA and Social Security will come in and say, we gave you too much money, we want some of it back. They call that a notice of overpayment and a notice for recoupment. And we can assist people with those things as well. And these are also legal services that OILS provides regarding disaster, end of life, advice for family, guardianship, title updates, uniquely federal Indian law jurisdictional concerns, and stress the need for post-disaster mitigation and help for tribal citizens, governments, and communities with mitigation and preparation between disasters. That is so important, especially in Oklahoma. So these are kind of the typical timelines of disaster events. You know, first 6 weeks after, we're helping people with wage issues, FEMA applications, insurance, landlord-tenant, document replacement, those kinds of things. The first month to 6 months after, it's insurance disputes, FEMA appeals, guardianships, foreclosure prevention, clearing property titles. And then 6 months to more after an event, foreclosures, bankruptcies, FEMA recoupments, home elevation certificate and floodplain zoning disputes. Those are huge, especially in the eastern part of the state. And also flood insurance proof of loss and FEMA flood directorate appeals. And we have had cases linger for years. Southern Louisiana Legal Services just closed the last of their Katrina cases a few years ago. And Katrina was, you know, over a decade ago. We just closed our last 2013 disaster cases a few years ago too. So these linger. This is not an exhaustive list of the things that people experience after disaster, but it's just a few. And again, faith communities, we could not do this work without faith communities. Faith communities are the backbone of disaster recovery in Oklahoma and everywhere else in the country and in the world. Legal aid organizations had not typically maintained strong relationships or partnerships with faith-based organizations. However, we have been working with Mary for many, many years because legal aid attorneys aren't, you know, on the backs of, you know, the fire trucks as they come into areas that have been disaster impacted. And oftentimes there are areas that we really traditionally have not been able to access quickly after a disaster event. And the way that we have been able to reach people, especially in rural communities, people who do not really trust folks from the city, is we have been able to work with our friends who are faith leaders in those communities to be able to work through them, to reach members of their congregations, to be able to help those folks after disaster happened, and also to get them information about, you know, disaster preparation, things they can do legally to prepare themselves prior to a disaster happening. So thanks to funding provided by LSC, LASSO has been able to expand that outreach to faith-based communities throughout Oklahoma. And also Brian and I have been able to teach on a national level about how folks can do outreach through faith communities and working with faith communities to help, especially rural populations, prepare for disaster. And we appreciate you. We don't know what we would do without you. We would love to hear more from you through the formal survey and the quiz at the link that is accessible through this QR code. So if you would like to take a picture of that QR code with your phone camera, I'll let it sit there for a minute. You can access that quiz and really help us better understand how we can improve our assistance to members of your community, members of your faith communities, and to those folks that you help and serve. So we have a variety of resources that are available at our website, which is Oklahoma Disaster Legal Help .org. We also have legalaidok.org. We have flyers on renters' rights, replacing important documents, disaster insurance claim tip sheets, how to hire a contractor after disaster. Those are all accessible there. Oils also has some wonderful rack cards that is a disaster preparedness checklist that you can access. And we also have the Legal Services Corporation Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center, ladrc.org. Again, Oklahoma Disaster Legal Help.org is a joint project of LASSO and OILS. And if you would like any of those things electronically sent to you, I am happy to do that. My email and Brian's email are available there on the screen. If you have any questions or again would like any of these materials electronically, we are happy to provide them. Just send us an email. And again, if you would like us to ever speak in your area or to assist members of your community with preparation, legal preparation, we're happy to do that. Just let us know. Again, thank you for your time today and for your willingness to make a difference in the life of Oklahomans every day, and for helping us make a difference after they've been disaster impacted.
Very much appreciated.
We appreciate you so very much. We will put those links on the resource page of the webinar hub as well, all the links that you just mentioned, so you can go there as well. Let me just say thank you all for being here. Truly, I don't know what we did in the disaster world without our legal aid and Oklahoma Indian Legal Services friends. I don't know what we did. The world changed when they started being involved in disaster response and recovery. And so we're so very grateful for them. Thank you all. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Krista, for being here today. Thank all of you for joining us. Watch for emails from Kyla. And I want to also especially invite you next week as we hear from the Reverend Dr. Bessie Hamilton, who is the coordinator of multi-ethnic and new church initiatives for the Oklahoma Conference of the United Methodist Church. She's going to be talking with us about increasing our racial justice IQ. Very pertinent and important topic as we're dealing with people in crisis. So thank you all again for being here. We'll stop the recording at this time. And if you want to stay here just a little bit longer, we can have some casual conversation. Thanks, y'all.